Y'all ready to be history?
It started.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
To the Pro Audio Suite.
These guys are professional. They're motivated.
Thanks to TriBooth, the best vocal booth for home or on-the-road voice recording. And Austrian Audio, making passion heard. Introducing Robert Marshall from Source Elements and Someone Audio Post, Chicago. Darren Robbo Robertson from Voodoo Radio Imaging, Sydney. Tech to the VO Stars, George the Tech Whittam from LA. And me, Andrew Peters, voiceover talent and home studio guy.
Line up, ladies!
Here we go.
And welcome to another Pro Audio Suite, thanks to Austrian Audio, making passion heard, and TriBooth. Don't forget the code PAP200 to get $200 off your purchase from TriBooth. This week we have another question. Robbo, over to you.
Yeah, another one. This comes from one of our Patreon supporters. He has a question about gear, or in his words, should I keep gear question. I have one of those art voice channel tube channel strips sitting in a rack not being used. Should I keep it, sell it? I can get at least $300 US for it, or give it to a museum, make a video blowing it up. Thanks. So I'm not familiar with these. So George, I'm guessing that might be over to you for that one.
Well,
is it the two rack space one with the VU meter in the middle of it? Is it that
I'm
one?
guessing so. Yeah.
Well, in a day and time where a voice actor really did benefit from having a full channel with, a whole suite of tools available to them, it was a good piece, especially if you retubed it, apparently, from what I understand. You put better tubes in it, and it could do a pretty good job.
I've heard a lot of good things. I've heard a lot of good things about those ART preamps. Amazingly, they're kind of like of the better low-budget pieces. And my question would be, do you have a spare? Do you need a spare? And if not, sell it. If you're truly not using it, there's no reason to just have something for the sake of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't need it. I mean, because if you listen to the show, we don't want you processing. So unless you're doing live streaming and doing, stuff that goes live to air, like radio and live streaming, you don't need a crazy front end chain to process your audio. That goes for everybody else out there with your DBX 286s and stuff. You don't need to do that, and you shouldn't use that on a voiceover track. You don't want to print the processing and be stuck with it forever, because what you think is great, it could be lipstick on a pig to a producer, so you really don't want to do that.
What if the pig's actually quite attractive?
Then it doesn't need lipstick.
Well, Miss Piggy.
Yeah, Miss Piggy.
Yeah, no, I think sell it, but
My only thought would be is if you don't have a backup of whatever that maybe you don't need a backup because you have your audio interface and some other preamp, but as long as you have something in case something goes down, then...
Yeah, as always the case with these questions, we don't know the rest of the details, right? So we don't know what he uses primarily and what he's trying to record with it and why he bought it in the first place and how it sounds and all that stuff.
The other thing that occurs to me is, just if you had the right voice for it, turning all the processing off, but just using the tubes as a pre.
I'm sure it's a perfectly good preamp. I'm not saying get rid of it because it does processing. I'm just saying get rid of it if you don't need it. So if all it is a backup preamp, but you have two others already.
Of course.
What do you need? Andrew's got a bunch, but even Andrew.
Andrew's
you have a Grace, a 1073. You got your
LA610.
Your LA610.
That's your tube chain, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the Fireface, the Sebetron and the Fireface, right? Because that's got preamps in it.
It's an RME.
RME.
Just an RME PCI card, yeah.
Oh, you have no preamps in your RME?
No.
Okay. So right. I mean, Andrew has got basically 4 preamps plus an SSL.
SSL2 interface.
SSL2, right. And then...
I've got 2 actually of those.
Yeah, and that's a good preamp by its own right.
It is actually. It's very nice. That's all you really need anyway.
So, it just depends. We don't know the rest of your story and what you used it for and why you're not using it now. But analog gear, the good news about analog gear is it doesn't, unless it was particularly badly designed or built, it doesn't plummet in value like anything that's digital. So USB interfaces are worthless after probably 3 or 4 years, right?
After Apple changes its connector.
Yeah, or
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Some standard changes or something. In general, I'm talking about the low end ones. There are people out there still using like a 10-year-old Matrix Halo, or some really high end, super high quality interface, But in general, that stuff goes down in value really quickly, just like a computer does. So, analog gear, microphones. I wouldn't say buying a new microphone and holding on to it makes any sense at all. But used gear, when well cared for, if you buy it today, in 10 years, it generally is worth as much or more than what you paid for it. That's what I've seen.
I think like good microphones go up in value or hold their own value for sure. Good analog gear seems to hold its own value. Shitty gear maybe goes down a little bit, but it's the problem with digital gear is that it goes from worth something to worth zilch. Like once it's out of compatibility, there's very few pieces of digital gear, actually digital gear is fine if it's a standalone processor. Some of those will gain cult status, but if it's computer gear, there's very few that I've got a
That's what I should have said. If it plugs into a computer with a USB or a FireWire cable, that's what I should have said.
I mean, I just dug out yesterday.
Yeah.
I found an old Focusrite interface that I had bought years ago. I mean, the thing's useless.
I have a box full of those right over here. I have a ton of them. Half of them probably still work, and some of them probably still sound awesome. But that gear doesn't hold value at all.
Yeah.
Well, I just recently we pulled an Avalon 737. Tube preamp out of a studio because I changed them over to Grace. It's one of my favorite changes because tubes are maintenance and all that stuff. So I'll sum it up quickly by saying I remember when those were really hot and people were buying them. They were generally around $2,200 to $2,400 US.
Yep.
I think that's what they were selling for new, right? They're $3,600 now. The same freaking piece of gear is $3,600.
Because you can't get them anymore? Is that why?
No, they're still producing them. That's just what they are now.
Yeah.
And then if you want to sell, so your used one that you paid $2,200 to $2,400 for, that's what it's worth now.
You get 20.
That's exactly, they're worth anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 for a used one, depending on the condition. So that one, we had to do a total refurb on it. It needed some serious bench time. Capacitor, recapping but in the end, it was a $500 bench service for a 15, 20-year-old preamp that in the end will sort of basically come out breaking even. So it's like you never even paid for it in the first place. It's like you rented it for 20 years, So analog gear is not a bad investment. Good analog gear, especially.
Good analog gear.
Yeah, but here's
Good
a question
analog
for
gear.
you. Now, having good analog gear, and I'm basing this on the interview I saw with the guy from Tears for Fears the other day who had an SSL, I assume, 4000 series in his studio at home.
Big
locked
console.
it up for a couple of years, came back, it didn't work. Or there was something wrong with it. I'm guessing the capacitors dried out or something. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But if you leave analog gear lying around, is there an issue? Should it always be fired up or what?
No, electrolytic capacitors dry up after about 10 to 15 years.
They dry up. The other thing is sometimes knobs can get scratchy if they're not exercised a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you don't want dirt getting in there, but generally what's going to happen to them is going to happen to them no matter what. The thing that causes electrolytic capacitors to dry up a lot is heat. So if a board like a SSL probably was left on and stayed on constantly, if it doesn't dissipate its heat well, I think that can contribute towards accelerating those capacitors from going bad.
If it sat in a basement studio that was always below 70 degrees, probably it's going to be in pretty good shape. But if it sat in a barn, probably in really bad shape. Where the temperature fluctuated wildly, from below freezing to 40 C, every year, that would be bad. That would be really bad.
Or that one didn't. I think it was actually in a decent studio and it was in England, so the temperature doesn't really move that much. It's either cold, very cold, or freezing cold and raining.
Kind of nice.
Yeah, overcast, or overcast.
It's like Seattle.
Oh, sunny. Oh, it's overcast again. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't imagine what it costs to recap and restore one of those. I met a microphone, an audio gear restorer here in LA because one of my clients, we would take his U67s to this fellow. And he would show me, every time I'd go in there, he'd show me some new obscure piece of gear that he was working on. And he'd be like, well, I can't say who it's for, but this is the only one of these I've ever seen. And I've been doing this for 40 years.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going to restore it. And I'm like, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty amazing.
Well, it's worth the money. I know a guy who bought a small Neve console, like a 16 channel. Oh, it'd be less than that, actually. It'd probably be 8 and 8, I think. 8 ins, 8 outs, I think it was. And that was up in 6 figures.
Huh.
Wow.
A 1970s Neve console, yeah.
Wow.
It was worth 6 figures with only 16 channel or 8 channels?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the sort of money he was talking about.
Holy smokes.
Some of those Neves go for like ridiculous money. It's true.
Yeah.
Well, go back and listen to the Neve interview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you guys are hearing Neve and go, who's Neve? What's Neve? Listen to the one we talked about. Just type in Neve on our website and just look for the Neve episode. And you'll hear like what kind of obsession there is about Neves and all that. There's so much storied history of those pieces of gear.
Yeah. Amazing desks.
Yeah, and some of them were made in really, really low numbers. You know, there might only be 8 or 10 ever made. Right.
Yeah, and some of them, there's only like one of them left.
Well, and often they were just made like this was customized for the BBC for this.
Yeah.
Or they were very specific builds.
Bespoke.
Like,
Yeah.
And the other thing is like Neve had his fingerprints on all that Focusrite stuff and so many other things. It doesn't even have the Neve name.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, and a conclusion to the question, if you are selling it, Robert will give you $50 for it.
That's right.
Well, that was fun. Is it over?
The Pro Audio Suite, with thanks to Tribooth and Austrian Audio, recorded using Source Connect, edited by Andrew Peters and mixed by Voodoo Radio Imaging, with tech support from George the Tech Whittam. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and join in the conversation on our Facebook group. To leave a comment, suggest a topic, or just say g'day, drop us a note at our website, theproaudiosuite.com.